by the volume of votes.
Just interesting to see Nicola Sturgeon there at their headquarters. Unless she may be at the Count actually in Glasgow, but I'm not sure. She may be at the other headquarters. But just interesting to focus on her place now, Brian, and Nicola's status, given what's happened in this campaign.
She had an absolutely critical role in the campaign. She fought an extremely hard fight. She's smiling extremely bravely there, but how would she other? There are many more results to come in, including her own, the city that she represents of Glasgow. She played a big role in the campaign by offering a perspective other than that purely of Alex Salmond, by arguing for the social justice perspective, which indeed the SNP did more generally, and she will play an absolutely pivotal role. Remember, 10 years ago, when Alex Salmond was elected for leader for the second time, it wasn't meant to be thus. Nicola Sturgeon was meant to be the leader, and then in that leadership campaign, it looked like she wasn't winning, and so Alex Salmond stepped in, became the leader again. She became the deputy, and has been an extremely loyal and extremely able deputy for 10 years. I guess the future for her would be as leader of the SNP. I'm not going to speculate on how quickly that would come, but the future for her would be as leader of the SNP.
Michael, what is your thought on that? On Nicola Sturgeon and the way the SNP has ridden in this campaign?
I think both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon are probably the most formidable political team that any party has in the UK. And they have very strong talents which both complement one another. There's no doubt Nicola's a very talented individual. I worked with her for a year and a half when she was a health secretary, and she's a very able and very strong health minister when she led that portfolio. I think she's also demonstrated her qualities in depth during the course of this referendum campaign. And she's someone who I think is tremendously talented, and she complements the First Minister very well in the talents that she brings to the leadership team.
It's worth saying, as we're speculating about the future of the SNP leadership, Alex Salmond has made it very clear what he intends to do if there's a no vote, which is to remain as First Minister. As you know, there's been a lot of speculation about whether David Cameron would be able to remain as Prime Minister if there was a yes vote. He has always said he was elected to serve out his term as First Minister, which takes him until 2016. He hasn't speculated beyond that, but he has made it very clear that that's what he was elected to do and what he intends to do. OK, we'll have a word with Brian again in a second. I want to bring in Andrew Marr. Andrew, I know you know Dundee very well. That result is interesting. Your thoughts on that and what we've heard so far tonight? Andrew, are you with us?
Well, Dundee is where I grew up. I know Dundee very well. It was always a very strong, solid and radical Labour city and a trade union city, but the SNP have made huge inroads there. And one thing I would say, it's 4 in the morning, here is a naked, outrageous, unashamed plea to keep watching. Because if you look what Dundee by itself has done to the percentages at the bottom of the screen, suddenly everything has become closer, and we still have a lot of very, very big councils to come, all the really big ones. So I think the story of the evening so far is clear, but just don't let's be too definite at this stage, even now. Dundee is a very, very famous political town. It became Yes City. It would have been an absolutely extraordinary moment if Yes City had said no. It hasn't. I agree with Brian Taylor, the numbers weren't quite good enough for the Yes campaign, but the night, although it's gone on for a long time, still has some very exciting hours to go.
Andy, thanks very much again. And yes, I suppose that's a warning we should head, Brian, isn't it?
It is, and we should also bear in mind that politics changes very greatly in the great and noble city of Dundee, which, like Andy, I was born and brought up in. Once had a certain Winston Churchill as its MP. He was a Liberal at the time. He'd been a Tory before, and he was later a Conservative, as he said himself rather famously. Anybody can rat on a party. It takes a genius to re-rat. But he was also in 1922. He stood against a guy called Neddy Scrimgeour, who stood on a campaign of socialism and the prohibition of alcohol, neither of which trait particularly appealed to Winston, but he was kicked out by the voters of Dundee in 1922. You would have thought that was absolutely the end of his political career, the death of ambition for W. Churchill, and yet he went on to other and better things. So politics churns.
I just think, before we let you go, because with our other colleagues, Brian, I just think it's important for us to say at this stage, we've been discussing, if it's a no, if it's a no, if it's a no. It is still perfectly possible for Yes to win.
And if it is a yes, then there is a challenge to the UK government and the UK parties again, that there would have to be a series of negotiations on the terms of that yes vote, and there would be very detailed and protracted negotiations, I'm sure.
Can I say, Joanne? I think there is a challenge to the yes people if there's a no vote. We seem to be hearing a lot about if there's a no vote or a yes vote, all of the challenges on the one side. What I would say is Scotland is divided, and I certainly want to play my part in bringing Scotland back together, because my sense is, whether it's yes or no, a lot of people were asking the same questions, and my appeal to the SNP is to recognise if it is a no vote, that we find a way of moving on and start looking at what we can do together, particularly in the Scottish Parliament. For too long it's been a platform where we play out party politics, and whatever happens, there'll be a lot of people hurting, and we need to find a way of, if people are beginning to look at politics again, we cannot retreat to continuing this argument. We have to have the debate about powers, but can't simply be about that. We need to be demonstrating politically that we want to come together on the big issues in education, health, job creation, and certainty for people in their workplace.
I don't think there's any question at all of those of us on the yes side, if it transpires later this morning that it's a no vote, that we need to bring the country together. And it'd be fair to say that the First Minister and Nicola Sturgeon have actually made great play of that. They've said whatever the outcome is, their job will be is to bring the country together. And I think it's important that all sides recognise that. And we do look at how we can bring the different areas together, different issues together, and to work in a constructive way. So Team Scotland applies to a yes outcome or a no outcome. And we need to make sure that we all play our part in doing that. It wasn't
helpful when the First Minister characterised it as Team Scotland and Team Westminster, and I hope they will retreat from that. But there is this question.
But these are things that are said in the debate, Joanne.
It was pretty serious.
We're now at the point where we've moved beyond the debate now, right? We're now at the point where we're getting the results, and I think we all have to rise above the sort of small politics that goes on during the course of an election campaign.
It's not to presume bad faith on behalf of the parties who said there's going to be more powers. I wouldn't have made that commitment if I didn't believe it. Neither would have my colleagues. If we can get to the place where we're not now having a conversation
with the result, Western Dunbartonshire.
At the Scottish Independence Referendum held on the 18th of September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in West Dunbartonshire area is 62,532. The turnout is 87.9%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 33,720. No, 28,776. There were 36 rejects. The reasons for the 36 rejects.
The latest result from West Dunbartonshire, and the turnout there, a very, very impressive 87.9, let's call it 88%. And the votes as follows: 33,720 to the yes campaign and 28,776 to the no campaign. We'll have the figures for you in a moment, but Sarah, your response to that?
West Dunbartonshire was one of the places in Scotland we most expected to vote yes. So the fact that it is the second place to have voted yes is not a great surprise. It's a better margin than they had in Dundee, from my very poor arithmetic from the look of it. But it's not an absolutely thumping majority, which is what, well, they would have expected to do very well in West Dunbartonshire. They've done pretty well in West Dunbartonshire.
Michael, your thoughts on that?
I'm very pleased with the result. You know, it's obviously early in the evening. I'm optimistic there'll be other positive results to come along. I think particularly some of the larger population areas in Scotland, and I think we'll see how things progress.
Joanne?
Yep. I mean, again, it just shows you the point I continue to make, the extent to which there has been division within Scotland. And that's the challenge for us all going forward.
Let's have a look at the figures then. Just let me show them to you so that we can just reinforce them. This is the result in just a minute ago. West Dunbartonshire, it is 8 minutes past 4 in the morning. This is the 8th result of 32. 33,720 for the yes campaign a turnout of 88%, 28,776 for the No campaign. So a victory for the Yes in Western Dunbartonshire on a 46% of the vote for the No campaign and 54% of the vote for the Yes campaign. So percentages, 54% Yes, 46% No, reinforcing that result. And let's have a look at some of the reaction. This is what happened when the vote was declared. Unmistakable joy at the headquarters of the Yes campaign because, well, they've had to wait a while to get two decent results for them, Dundee and Western Dunbartonshire. And we're expecting a few more results in within the next 10 to 15 minutes, which is good news. 8 results gone, and I think Midlothian is about to declare. Let's see where it is. Let's join it.
On 18th September 2014. Hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Midlothian area is 60,395. The turnout is 86.8%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 26,370. No, 33,972. Rejected, 53. The reasons for rejection are as follows. Want of an official...
So the result in from Midlothian, and let me just reinforce the figures for you. We'll have them on screen in a moment. But they are 26,370 to the Yes campaign, a victory for the No campaign in Midlothian. This is where the modern campaigning style started, they say, under William Gladstone, with the famous Midlothian campaign. 33,972 to the No campaign, 87% turnout. That is 44% of the vote for the Yes campaign and 56% to the No's. And here's the reaction. The sense of the relief and joy in Midlothian. Sarah, some thoughts?
Midlothian is almost as close to a bellwether council as you can get in Scotland. All of our predictions had it right in the middle. Difficult to say whether it was going to go yes or no. This is the area south of Edinburgh down to the borders, Dalkeith, Bonnyrigg, Musselburgh, places like that. A lot of people who commute into Edinburgh. All of the predictions made it very, very difficult to call, and that's a decent result for the No campaign in Midlothian.
Joanne?
Yes, that's a very... I mean, I was out speaking within the Midlothian area. Was struck, actually, by how strongly people felt about voting no. But I think that's a very, very pleasing result to see that there.
I'm just wondering whether John Curtis might be available to talk to us in a moment, because John's guidance on Midlothian is as follows. The fact that no ahead with 56% of the vote gives us a further indication that they are possibly on course to win. Let's get John to add some more detail to that. John, your reading?
I mean, I think my reading is now that, the evidence that the No side are going to win is beginning to stack up. But equally, however, I think we're also now beginning to look at a No success that is nothing like as substantial as they probably anticipated when this referendum was called 18 months ago, or indeed what they might have hoped for a little less than 2 months ago. It certainly looks as though the yes vote's going to be quite substantial across Scotland, but as the opinion polls were indicating, virtually all, indeed unanimously, immediately before polling day, that the yes have not done enough to win this referendum. So still plenty to look out for, still by no means certain, but No certainly looking like the favourites, but favourites to win. But not any more than that.
OK, John, and just a thought. We have East Lothian and Stirling, which will be with us shortly. What will they tell us, do you think?
Well, East Lothian, I think, is not a place where we expect the Yes side to do particularly well. It's an area where Labour have remained strong and have largely kept the SNP out. Indeed, it's one of the few places they managed to hang on to in the 2011 Scottish election. Stirling, possibly somewhat better for the Yes side, but certainly not their most propitious territory. The other one we're expecting quite soon, Angus, on the other hand, that's a place where the SNP have long held the Westminster constituency, and if they don't do well there, it will be a substantial disappointment for the SNP.
John, thank you very much. Can we have a look to see what's going on in East Lothian, just to see how close they are? It's 4:15, and we may be in luck. Let's join it.
Well, once again, good evening or good morning, everyone. I'd like to make the statement of local totals for the East Lothian area. I, Angela Leach, Counting Officer, appointed for the East Lothian Council local government area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on the 18th of September 2014, hereby certify and declare. Firstly, the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the East Lothian Council area is 71,798. The turnout is 87.6%. Secondly, the total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 27,467. No, 44,283. Rejected votes, 48. The reason for rejection are as follows.
Well, as Sarah and John suggesting, pretty thumping win there for the No campaign in East Lothian, though the margin is interesting. 44,000 to 27,000 roughly no to yes. The turnout, again, up in the high 80s, around 88%. A percentage of the vote for you, the yes vote taking 38%, and the no vote in East Lothian on 62%. Sarah, a word about that, because I'm just wondering whether that's a bigger margin than we expected.
It possibly is a bigger margin than we expected, although interestingly, Better Together were whispering to us over 2 hours ago that they were going to take this with 62%.
Sarah, let's go to Stirling straight away.
I, Bob Jack, Counting Officer, appointed for the Stirling local government area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on 18 September 2014, hereby certify and declare 1. The total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Stirling Council area is 62,225. The turnout is 90.1%. 2. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 25,010. No, 37,153.
So, Stirling, and that is a very big win for the No campaign in Stirling. 25,000 to the Yes campaign, 37,000 to the No campaign. Look at the turnout. It says 90%, it was 90.1%. And the percentages look like this. The Yes campaign on 40%, and then 20% above that, the No campaign on 60%. I'll come back to Sarah for a response again, but we may well get a couple more in, Sarah, in which case we'll go back to the counts immediately. But let's take both of them.
We can describe Stirling pretty briefly as a very, very hefty win for the No campaign. Stirling, the site of the Battle of Bannockburn, of course, but it's a very substantial margin by which they've decided to vote no. It wasn't absolutely clear that they were going to vote no. There was a possibility if there was going to be a surging yes vote, Stirling could have gone yes, but that really is a very strong result for them, as is the East Lothian result. They'll be very pleased with those.
Nick?
Just look at the scale of these results. 12% margin in Midlothian, it's 20% in Stirling, it's 23% margin between yes and no in East Lothian there. These are big, big margins. You know, earlier in the evening we were looking at quite close results. The predictions in the polls was a 4% and maybe a 6% gap. Now, look, Glasgow will outweigh these and probably be yes, that's what we've been hearing. Much bigger population. Edinburgh will probably be no, but it's a big population again. But these are big, big margins that are coming in for now for the No campaign.
Michael, your thoughts on the results you just heard, especially the one in Stirling?
Stirling, I stayed in Stirling for many years, and it is an area which has a very significant residual Conservative vote. Large rural area to the west of it as well. It's not an area which I would have thought, from our perspective, would have been natural yes territory. So I'm not surprised that we haven't been able to secure a yes vote in Stirling. But what I do know is that there's been a very good fight fought by the yes campaigners in Stirling, led by Bruce Crawford. But it's an area where there has been a long-standing, very significant residual Conservative support over many, many years.
But that's the kind of support that you've mopped up electorally over some time. I mean, if you look at the map of Scotland, ex-Conservative areas, rural areas, is where the SNP has done very well. It's a kind of an odd thing happening here.
We do quite well in Falkirk, we don't have much in the way of Tories there.
No, but so don't pretend.
In Glasgow we do very well in constituencies where there's very little in the way of Conservative vote.
If I let me finish, I was waiting
to get a result in Falkirk. Let's go.
To declare the local results for this area. I, Rosemary Glacken, counting officer appointed for the Falkirk local government area at the Scottish Independent Referendum held on 18th September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Falkirk Council area is 108,626. The turnout is 88.7%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. For the answer yes, 50,489. For the answer no, 58,030. There were 107 rejected votes. The reasons for the rejections are as follows.
So, the result from Falkirk. This is where Dennis Canavan has his base, the former Labour MP at Westminster, and of course has been leading the Yes campaign, win there for the No campaign. Look at the figures, 58,000 to 50,000, a turnout of 89%. The No campaign on 53% of the vote in Falkirk and 47% to the Yes campaign. I think we can get some, can we get some reaction on that? Oh, there they are. Scenes for you at the No campaign headquarters in Glasgow, and they can add the figures as everyone else can, so they're following with interest, and you can see the relief and the delight on people's faces there. It looks to me, Joanne, as if they kind of think it's in the bag.
No, I don't think they think that, but I mean the Falkirk seat is an interesting one because both of the Scottish Parliament seats are held by the SNP. We've had our troubles in Falkirk. I mean, I think that is a really interesting result. But, you know, we're going to see more of this coming. It's just quite fascinating.
Sarah?
It is a very interesting result. As Joanne says, it has SNP MSPs. It had two Labour MPs. One of them is Eric Joyce, who got into a fair bit of trouble and is no longer a Labour MP, but he was when he was returned. Exactly the kind of part of Scotland which previously used to vote Labour has been voting SNP recently, and if all of the SNP support had voted yes, we would have expected it to go yes, but it hasn't. It's gone no by some margin.
But isn't that what we're increasingly seeing, which is a breakdown between the link between SNP support and support for independence? In other words, it's perfectly rational for people to choose to vote for different parties in different elections, for the Westminster election, for Holyrood. There are plenty of voters who think Alex Salmond's been a highly successful First Minister, who like the sort of administration he's run, but don't for a second want independence. And therefore you can have strong SNP areas where they don't get a very high yes vote, and you can get weak, strong Labour areas where quite a lot of them do vote yes for independence.
What we haven't seen yet yet, apart from in the Western Isles, is the real SNP heartlands. What we've seen coming in are some of the places where voters still vote Labour in Westminster elections, vote SNP in Holyrood because they want them to run the Scottish Government. Perth and Kinross, Angus, Moray, Aberdeenshire, the places where the SNP are traditionally strong in Westminster elections, we haven't seen them come in yet.
Let's hold that thought, because Jeremy Vine has a little more on where we are and the patterns that we've seen so far. What's to come? Jeremy?
Well, it's so interesting, isn't it? If I show you the scoreboard here, you will see those councils which have come in. And actually, if I order them by size, one of the most notable things is that, as you'd expect, really, the councils where there are fewest votes to count are the ones that came in first. So all the way down here, the Islands and Inverclyde and Stirling and Midlothian, West Dunbartonshire. More no's than yeses. That is very noticeable here, although yes there for Dundee City. And still the really big councils we have not heard from. Let me show you these 2014 European election results. So the best comparable results we've got, or anything this year, in terms of any kind of data at all, comes from the European election results. And here they are. And these yellow blocks are the councils where the SNP vote was strongest. So I'll just actually order them so you see the strongest vote for the SNP up on the left-hand side there. Lanarkshire actually went no, didn't it? But Dundee City went yes. There's Angus, there's Moray, and so on. And gradually, as the blocks come to the right, you see the yellow starts to fade, and then it's grey right over this side. Now let's just have a look. If you just bring this camera around, we'll have a look at some of the two areas in particular which we're going to look out for now, which are here, West Lothian and East Ayrshire. OK, not the strongest of all the SNP support that was available in the European elections, but still pretty strong SNP areas. Let's just take a look at the first one of those two, West Lothian. And I'll show you you can see it on the map there flashing, near to Edinburgh. And if we have a look at this, you'll see just how close it is between Labour and the SNP in West Lothian, or was in the European election results. So looking at the results that we've had so far, yes, it is true that the SNP are pretty strong here, but Labour is strong too. And maybe what's happening here is that Labour's voters remained loyal to its leadership, who were all saying vote no. Labour's vote, of course, in these kinds of areas, often comprised of lower socio-economic groups, people on benefits sometimes, in manual trades and so on. Maybe they've gone against what we thought was going to be the instinct to vote for independence and stuck with the advice they were getting from Gordon Brown and others. So it's this trade-off between SNP and Labour in areas where they're very close that's very interesting. And I'll show you exactly the same kind of effect with East Ayrshire as well. So over to the map we go. Let's just have a look here. And I'll just make East Ayrshire flash for you. You see it's just south of Glasgow there. And come back with me and we'll see really interesting, exactly the same kind of effect here. Here we are, the East Ayrshire 2014 European election results. What do you see here? Almost neck and neck between the SNP and Labour. So again, it may be that the reason that the SNP is struggling, or in the independence campaign is struggling in some of these areas, is that actually Labour's voters remained loyal to what Labour's leaders have been saying, Mr Miliband, Mr Brown and so on, which is stick with the UK. Now, if I just pull that graph away and show you these councils again, we've done this graph before, but it's very interesting. This is by social grade here. So again, looking at those so-called Ds and Es, never a particularly pleasant term, but people who are maybe on benefits or in socially deprived situations, you can see that it was thought that correlated strongly with the desire for independence. So we were thinking, weren't we, that places like Inverclyde and North Ayrshire, West Dunbartonshire, Glasgow and so on. There's East Ayrshire, by the way, West Lothian quite close to it down there. We were thinking that those would be more inclined to go for independence. The evidence so far we've seen is that that may not be a strong correlation in this referendum. And when we come to East Ayrshire and West Lothian, where incidentally Alex Salmond was born, as Sarah was saying earlier, we'll look very closely to see what happens.
Jeremy, thanks very much. Well, let's go straight to Angus because we have a result from there.
I, Richard Stiff, being counting officer appointed for the Angus local government area at the Scottish independence referendum held on the 18th of September 2014, hereby certify and declare: 1. The total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in Angus is 80,302. The turnout is 85.7%. The total number of rejected votes was 66, and the reasons for rejection were as follows: 17 for voting for both answers, 4 for writing a mark by which the voter could be identified, and 45 void for uncertainty or unmarked. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area was as follows: yes, 35,044, no, 45,192. That concludes this evening's count. Thank you for your attention.
Well, that is a very significant result. Angus, which has been sending an MP to Westminster for the SNP for many years, right back to the 80s, and I'm thinking of Andrew Welsh, who was representing Angus for quite a long time. It is a very big SNP tradition. Well, those are the results. 56% to the no campaign, 44% for the yes. Let's go straight to Dumfries.
The turnout is 87.5%. The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer in the referendum question in this area is as follows: yes, 36,614, no, 70,039.
The result in from Dumfries, and it's a very, very hefty vote for the no campaign, which I'm supposed to say isn't surprising, because this is the area that has, I think, the single Conservative Member of Parliament from Scotland, and 66% to 34%. We're going to get Renfrewshire in a couple of minutes, so time for Sarah just to give some thoughts on Angus, which really is a significant result, and maybe a word on Dumfries.
Dumfries isn't a surprise. It was always anticipated it would go no, but that is a very hefty majority. Angus, much more significant. We were just saying we hadn't had any results in from major SNP heartlands. Angus is an interesting place. It's a wealthy, elderly population living in Arbroath, Forfar, places like that. So on social demographics, you might expect them to vote no, but as you say, huge SNP tradition right in the middle of the SNP heartlands, and a significant result for no there.
Yeah. Nick, what do you make of that?
Well, you're just getting a series of these very big margins now, aren't you? Which is not, you know, the 4%, the 6%, it's plus 12% in Angus. Dumfries, as you say, predictably a no vote, but plus 28%. So you are mounting up these significant leads now for the no campaign. And yet, in Dundee, there was a significant margin for yes, but there'd have to be a massive margin in somewhere like Glasgow to outweigh this.
A quick word, Joanne, and then we'll have East Renfrewshire coming up.
Sure. I mean, I keep saying these are interesting results. I mean, my sense is now that across the country, people are not necessarily voting with their what appears to be the political label, and the challenge for politicians is going to be to rise to that.
OK, let's go to the count.
287. For no, 41,000. Votes rejected were 44. The reason for rejection were want of an official mark as 0. Voting in favour of both answers 13. Writing or mark by which voter could be identified 4. Unmarked or void for uncertainty 27. This concludes the counting of votes for the East Renfrewshire area. I would like to just take this opportunity to thank all the staff present and the police and everyone who has supported the referendum. Thank you very much.
Well, the result in there from East Renfrewshire, and turnout there of 90.5%. Lost the first few numbers on that, Sarah. Which way did that go?
I didn't catch the numbers either. It's an astonishing turnout. Yeah. We know that much. If I had to guess, I would say that East Renfrewshire has probably voted no. That's where Jim Murphy, right, who we had in earlier, represents. Because
he did sound confident earlier, didn't he? So it's a fairly good bet. And Joanne could have told us that as well. But there you are. Those are the results. 41,000 to 24,000 in East Renfrewshire. A big win for the No campaign, as Jim Murphy signalled earlier, 90% turnout. Percentages, 37% to 63%. East Dunbartonshire, I think, is also ready.
Each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 30,624. No, 48,300. Rejected.
So, that is East Dunbartonshire. The result there, 48,000 to 30,000. The No campaign with a majority of around 18,000 there. And you may have seen the flash on the screen, because I think we saw the result from Aberdeen going through. And let me show you the result from Aberdeen, which went through at the same time. And it is a pretty hefty win for the No campaign. This is Aberdeen City. This is not Aberdeenshire. This is the city of Aberdeen. Lots of workers there, of course, who are not Scottish. They're from outside Scotland and indeed from abroad. They'll have affected part of this pattern of voting, but we can discuss that with Sarah. But look at the no vote there, 84,000, 59,000, and then 59% to the no's, 41% to the yes, a turnout of 82%, which is very, very high. Not quite as high as some of the other counties and local authority areas we've seen. So, a thought there on what we've seen. Aberdeen City first, Sarah.
That's another substantial win for the No campaign. As you say, a lot of people born outside Scotland, a lot of people who work in the oil industry, of course, and BP and some of the big oil companies made pretty clear their thoughts on the referendum and that they wanted to see a no vote, but that is a good no vote in Aberdeen.
And we also had East Dunbartonshire, didn't we, which was another hefty win, which we mentioned that earlier, didn't we? Was that the Jim Murphy? Yes, that's right, yeah.
No, that's
that
not.
Was
but it was
Renfrewshire,
that was East Renfrewshire. That was another hefty win in East Dunbartonshire, following what is now looks as though it is a pattern of some pretty hefty wins. Even in areas where we expected No to do well, they're doing particularly well.
Well, there you are. There are the figures there, 48,000 to 30,000. Joanne?
I'm just going to say that I heard some expert earlier on in the evening, I think on BBC, saying that Aberdeen could have been expected to be a win for Yes, and I'm astonished at how big a victory that is. And it feels to me, I think there's a bit of a story about there was a rush at the end and it was about powers and somehow it was, victory was snatched from Yes at the very end of this process. I think these are now beginning to look that Scotland's affirming it wants to stay inside the United Kingdom, is now dealing all of us a different hand, which is how do we get to the big issues that people have been talking about. I mean, I am concerned that John Curtis talked about it would be a win, but nothing more than that. Well, I think if there was one vote for Yes, Alex Salmond would have been looking somewhere to land his helicopter to declare victory. So I think these figures are beginning to suggest that actually it's more than just on the margins of the campaign. People were affirming confidently they want to stay in the United Kingdom, although there's plenty more to go.
Well, you mentioned John Curtis. I'm going to go to John. And John, what is your take on where we are now then?
Well, we've just had a whole slew of results, as you've seen here, about 5 or 6 within a matter of as many of minutes. And that really did add to the evidence that the No side are looking set to win this referendum and probably doing so fairly comfortably, though not as comfortably as they might have expected to do a couple of months ago, but certainly a fairly substantial lead for the No side, if indeed these results are anything like what we expect. Particularly look at the results in places like Midlothian and Aberdeen, places where we would expect the result not to be that far away from the overall Scotland result, and in both cases, No were very clearly ahead.
So, I'm just looking ahead a little, John, and thinking again, Edinburgh and Glasgow. I think we're still waiting for Fife, aren't we? So, those patterns, what are you going to be looking for there now?
Well, I mean, the truth is, if the Yes side are going to have any chance left in this referendum, they're going to have to win Glasgow stupendously. But so far, the evidence from the west of Scotland is that while they might be narrowly ahead in the city, we wouldn't be surprised about that. We would be very surprised if there was anything in the way of a substantial Yes victory. And in the absence of that, there seems very little prospect of the Yes side being able to win this referendum. OK. For now, John, thank you very much. The strongest signal so far from
from John Curtis there on which way things are going. A quick reminder again for you of the total so far. Let's have a look at the totals, because of all these results that have come in now in the last half hour, I think it's good to have a look at the total across Scotland. So we have just passed the halfway point in terms of the number of declarations, 17 out of 32, so we're over halfway. 670,000 to the No campaign, 521,000 to the Yes campaign. A turnout on average at the moment of 86%, which is a good 5 points up on the record 81% turnout in the 1951 general election. So, you know, that's the kind of day it's been, and that's the kind of night it's been. You know, even those on opposing sides are celebrating the remarkable engagement of the Scottish electorate in this process. So a turnout of 86%. It is a great advert for Scottish democracy all around the world. That's where we are, 17 from 32. And I suppose one thing we should say at this time as well, Joanne, is that, you know, if you are going to maintain this progress, there will then be, as we've discussed earlier, very tough questions about the pledge that was put together, the fact that Gordon Brown promised incredibly robust action in constitutional terms in a very short space of time. Mm-hmm. Now, is that deliverable?
Well, I think Gordon Brown would not have made that commitment unless he believed it was deliverable, and I think everybody came together and recognised that. And I think we rise to the challenge on the issue of powers. But where people were most susceptible to voting yes, it was around this idea, it doesn't have to be the way the Tories have done things can be better. And I think the challenge to the SNP who are in charge in the Scottish Parliament is now to show to these areas what it means to have social justice in action now, because we have seen over the last period money getting taken out of cities like Glasgow, frankly, anti-poverty programmes being cut, and the kinds of measures that would make a difference in terms of job creation, cutting the colleges at a time when people need skills. And I think we rise to the challenge in powers, absolutely, but for the Parliament, with that majority, with an avowed commitment to social justice, let's see that delivered now when we go back on Tuesday. That would be my message to SNP. We'll have the argument about powers, but if your biggest pitch to people, and particularly in my own city, was that you would create a fairer society, there are things we can do right now, and it is about training, it is about skills, it is about opportunities to get people into work, and I'll do whatever I can to support the Scottish Government if that's what they're going to do. Okay. It's not what they've done so far.
I'm just getting news that Glasgow may be declaring within 10 minutes, which would be a very big piece of the jigsaw for us. Tommy Sheridan of Solidarity saying on social media he's broken-hearted at the trend towards a no vote, says that the British establishment has mobilised, in his view, against the prospect of yes. Michael, we'll be releasing both of you in a second. A final word from you at this stage.
Well, I think the trend is quite clear in how the night's progressing, but I think it's important to recognise that the thing that has struck me the most over the last 12 hours has been the way in which people have come out to the polling stations in Scotland in a way that has never occurred before. I met a gentleman today in a polling station who was 70 and he was voting for the first time. That people feel genuinely engaged in the electoral process. And I think the issue is not about politicians going away and tinkering with things, but it's about us making sure that we engage with people much more effectively and listen to what they are saying. It's not about politicians, this is about people. And I think if there's a lesson that comes from this, it's about how we listen to people and how we respond to what they're saying to politicians.
Michael and Joanne, I'm going to hold you for a second. Michael and Joanne, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you with us. We'll be back in just a moment because it's time for a summary of the news.
I'm Carol Walker with a summary of the main news. Early results in the Scottish referendum have favoured the No campaign. 17 areas have declared their results. So far, 2 areas, including Dundee, have voted yes. Overall, the No vote is on 56%, with big wins in Orkney and Shetland. The final result is expected between 6 and 7 o'clock this morning. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
This is what a good start looks like for the No campaign. Lift off for one activist and lift off for those wanting to keep Scotland in the UK. Clackmannanshire, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles voted no, as did Renfrewshire.
Yes, 55,466. No, 62,067.
But within the last hour, wins for the Yes campaign, including in Dundee.
Yes, 53,620. No, 39,880.
And just look what that victory meant at Yes campaign headquarters.
I'm very pleased with the result. You know, it's obviously early in the evening. I'm optimistic there'll be other positive results to come along. I think particularly some of the larger population areas in Scotland, and I think we'll see how things progress.
But analysts say it's the No campaign who have the upper hand so far and are more likely to win. If there is a no vote overall, the government at Westminster says big changes are coming across the UK.
If, as we all hope, we can secure enhanced devolution for Scotland in short order, we also need, with a similar sense of urgency, to make sure that other people within the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, in Wales and, of course, in England, have their voices more clearly heard and respected than ever before.
You need a head for numbers and strong fingers for a night in one of the 32 count centres across Scotland. Dawn is not far away, but there's still plenty of counting to do. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released which appears to show a British journalist being held captive by Islamic State extremists. John Cantley, seen here in Syria, was captured while working as a newspaper journalist. In the latest footage, Mr Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech into the camera. That's it from me. Now back to Scotland Decides.
Carol, thank you very much. I think we have a result in from North Lanarkshire, so let's have a look.
The total number of votes cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 115,783.
So the no vote there was 110,922. Yes vote 115,783. A turnout of 84%. And there's Nicola Sturgeon very happily applauding the result there from North Lanarkshire. We were discussing earlier the importance of this area given its heritage and given the Labour traditions in this area to a very, very important contest between yes and no in North Lanarkshire. Sarah, what do you make of it?
North Lanarkshire is very interesting. We probably expected a yes victory there, but it really is. If you looked up Labour heartlands in the dictionary, you'd find a map of North Lanarkshire there. This is the most traditional Labour voting area that you can find in Scotland. They've been flirting with the SNP recently, as have a lot of Labour areas, but if anywhere was going to stay true to Labour, it was going to be North Lanarkshire. But then it is an area with high unemployment, high social deprivation, the social characteristics we expected to vote yes. But they've obviously been listening to their Labour leaders that they traditionally listen to. Gordon Brown singing the old-time religion has obviously worked its trick to a certain extent in North Lanarkshire.
South Lanarkshire is a rather different story. Let's have a look at the South Lanarkshire result. Oh, we're going to Perth first.
41,475. No, 62,700. 62,714. The total number of rejected ballot papers is 96. The reasons for rejection are...
So, a big victory for the No campaign in Perth and Kinross, 62,000 to 41,000. And so the No campaign taking 60% of the vote there, and the Yes campaign taking 40% of the vote in Perth and Kinross. So a very healthy 20% margin. Let me just give you the figures. For South Lanarkshire, which I was about to do before the declaration came in there from Perth and Kinross. So there they are. A big win for the No campaign in South Lanarkshire, 121,000 to 100,000, so a very different area in many ways to North Lanarkshire, Sarah. But let's talk about Perth and Kinross.
Perth and Kinross, that is absolutely astonishing, because that's real SNP territory, that is. They've been voting for SNP MPs for a long time. John Swinney, the Finance Secretary, is an MSP in that area. In 1995, Rosanna Cunningham beat one Douglas Alexander to that seat in a by-election. If Perth and Kinross is voting no by that kind of margin, that really is a surprise that the SNP have not been able to bring out their traditional vote.
Well, it's an interesting question about what sort of vote is switching where. So in other words, we knew the Central Belt, there was a suggestion that traditional Labour voters would go towards yes, or a portion of them, 20, 30%. Are we seeing people in the north of Scotland, SNP, used to be called rather disparagingly tartan Tories in that part of the world? Is it that they're abandoning the SNP in the sense of that commitment to independence and voting yes to stay in the Union, albeit that they may wish the SNP to carry on running Holyrood forever and a day? Quite consistent for them to do that. It does seem to me that those votes are coming in that part of Scotland rather than that traditional Labour belt.
It's a good moment to bring in our new guests. Michael Moore, the former Scottish Secretary, and the broadcaster and commentator Hardeep Singh Kohli for the Yes campaign. Good to see you both. Thank you very much for coming in. Michael, it doesn't seem very long ago since you and I were talking about the arrangements for this referendum when the Edinburgh Agreement was signed. Talk us through the trend that we're now seeing and what you make of it.
There's still some big caveats. We've still got to get two of Scotland's biggest cities to declare, and until we know how Glasgow and Edinburgh have declared, all of this might turn into reverse. I hope not, but because the trend is encouraging from my side of the argument. But as Nick was observing there are different patterns around Scotland that are, at this stage, quite hard to explain. Angus, a bedrock SNP area, and Perthshire in recent years not voting for independence, whereas in some of the Labour heartlands you're seeing some pretty big swings to the SNP, although in fairness they've been working very hard in those areas. The reality is that Scotland is divided, and it's divided between town and country, it's divided within cities, and we're going to have a job of work, all of Scotland's politicians and beyond, to get everything healed afterwards.
So the process of healing, Hardeep, I mean, the trend we've been talking about, and let's say straight away, there are still 12 results to come, OK? But that process...
Yeah, I mean, I feel a Van Morrison song coming on, Let the Healing Begin. But as a Scottish football fan, we're used to being, glorious defeat. But we don't have an Archie Gemmell goal to fetishise this time. I think Edinburgh will cancel Glasgow out. I think what's fascinating about this, for me, is that I would have expected a higher turnout in Glasgow when the rest of the country is hitting, mid-80s, high 80s. I expect Glasgow and Dundee to have been much higher. I think the tactical voting here, with the greatest respect, what's being dressed up as tactical voting, actually, and, one has to be gracious in defeat, and I believe we're defeated.
You, Hardeep.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Give me a second, we're going to Glasgow.
Can I have your attention, please? I, George Black, Counting Officer appointed for the Glasgow local government area at the Scottish Independence Referendum held on 18th September 2014, hereby certify and declare the total number of ballot papers counted in the referendum in the Glasgow area is 364,664. The turnout is 75%. The total numbers of vote cast in relation to each answer to the referendum question in this area is as follows. Yes, 194,779. No, 169,347. There were 538 rejected ballot papers. This concludes the counting of votes for the Glasgow area. Thank you.
So, that's it. The big result is in from the city of Glasgow. Nicola Sturgeon there, giving some response at the Glasgow count. But the result is clear. It is a yes vote in Glasgow. 194,000 to 169,000. A lower turnout. Hardip was mentioning it earlier. 75%. Still a good turnout by normal standards. But it's low by the exceptional standards of this referendum. And if we look at the percentages, 53% yes, 47% no. The big question, of course, is that margin going to be big enough to give the yes campaign a very telling boost, Sarah?
Almost certainly not. The Yes campaign had to do better in Glasgow than that. And what's fascinating about the places where they haven't done as well as we expected them to is that the turnout is a little bit lower than some areas. The energy and the enthusiasm that there was behind the Yes campaign we thought was going to get their vote out to the polls. Throughout this campaign we've seen more posters, more stickers, more energy, more excitement from the Yes campaign, and we thought they were going to be going around getting the people who don't usually vote, large numbers of whom have obviously gone to the polls because we've got high turnouts, that they were going to get their support out to the polls. And in the areas where they needed to do better are the areas there is slightly lower turnout, and it would seem that they just haven't had the foot soldiers out there getting their vote to the polls, which is a surprise.
Nick?
It's not finally in, but I think we know it now. The United Kingdom is surviving. There will not be an independent Scotland. The capital city is still to come, of course, but Glasgow, the big city, had to be a massive yes vote. It's still an important victory, which will be welcomed hugely, I'm sure, by yes campaigners, but it is simply not big enough. I think any hope that they had of overcoming those leads that we've seen mounting up in other areas is now gone. They know they've lost, I think, in the No campaign. No, they've won, and I'd be surprised if we didn't hear that pretty clearly from the politicians involved very soon.
Well, after that result then from Glasgow, which, as we say, is the big one in terms of numbers, let's go to John Curtis and ask him for his update.
I entirely agree with both what Sarah and Nick have said. We were not surprised to see the yes side ahead in Glasgow, given the pattern of the results so far. It is a city with very high levels of social deprivation, a relatively high SNP vote. Those are conditions that are favourable to a relatively high yes vote, but 53% in the city just isn't enough. Frankly, to win the referendum, even if the other results haven't been so bad as they had been, it certainly isn't good enough given how bad the results have been elsewhere. So it simply now adds further weight to the evidence that it looks as though the No side have won this referendum and in truth have probably won it pretty comfortably and probably a bit more comfortably than the final opinion polls were suggesting.
So 23 results in, John, with 9 results to go. As you say, Edinburgh is still to come. But is there anything in that batch of 9 results which could, possibly, potentially yield some unexpected thing for the Yes campaign?
Well, the truth is, with just 9 left, even though it does include Edinburgh, it now does look very unlikely. The truth is that the results that have been coming in, the last half dozen results or so, have been virtually exactly in line with what you would have expected given the results that had come in the first dozen 18 councils. So there does now seem to be a very consistent pattern, and therefore it would be very, very surprising if the pattern were to be disturbed by the 9 councils that are left.
Well, based on, just stay with us, John, because we've just got a figure on the screen there, which I just want you to help explain to viewers, because we've now calculated what the No campaign needs to win in terms of numbers of votes. And it says 566,613. That is based on the calculation on the turnout in that context, yes?
That's correct. I think there are still 1 or 2 councils where we don't quite know the turnout yet, but we can estimate what it's likely to be, given the pattern so far. So, yeah, you can see there's still quite a way to go in terms of the arithmetic. But I think the truth is that it will now require something quite extraordinary for that arithmetical difference not to be made up in the next 2 or 3 hours.
And just one more point on turnout, John, because we mentioned the turnout in Glasgow, 75%, which by the standards of this referendum is quite low. But just set the overall turnout in context for us.
Well, it looks as though we're heading for a turnout of around 85% or so. That will be a record turnout. for a nationwide ballot in Scotland since the advent of the mass franchise, and to that extent at least the arguments from those who wanted this referendum that indeed it's engaged Scotland's population, that is perfectly clear. Given we're now talking about an era which is become increasingly difficult to get voters to the polls, there can be no doubt that Scotland's voters felt this was a choice that mattered and a choice that in which they decided to engage. That said, however, we've still seen the very traditional pattern whereby some parts of Scotland, such as Glasgow, the folk there are just simply less likely to turn out than those in the more middle-class parts of the city, including places like East Renfrewshire and East Dunbartonshire next to the city. So to that extent, at least, old patterns of politics are still there in our referendum, even at a time of a very, very different kind of a high turnout.
John, thanks very much. And we're keeping an eye on the benchmark figure there and, of course, the target figure. And we have a target figure for no and a target figure for yes. So keep an eye on that because it's going to change as these 9 results, the 9 remaining results, come in. So where are we? Let's take stock. Jeremy will tell us.
Hugh, let's look at the numbers of votes that are being counted and show them on the back screen here. Yes and no.